Next on Primary Care, we're here again at Hartford Memorial Baptist Church in Detroit, speaking with dermatologist Dr. Bobbie Edwards. Time to talk about Black women and their hair loss.
Our women are losing hair and trying to cover up and not living their best lives and being quite miserable, not understanding what's going on with their body.
Hello and welcome to Primary Care, the show dedicated to improving the health of African Americans. I'm your host, Dr. Lonnie Joe. Alopecia is a general term for hair loss. Estimates are that anywhere from a third to a half of all Black women experience some hair loss or alopecia in their lifetime. The most common forms of hair loss for Black women are traction alopecia, hair loss caused by tightly pulled hair, inflammatory or CCCA hair loss that starts at the crown of the scalp and spreads outward, and lupus of the scalp, hair loss caused by either inflammation, discoid sores, or lesions or medications used to treat lupus. Oftentimes, embarrassment, stigma, and lack of information prevent women from seeking help. Our guest today says if diagnosed and treated early, hair loss can be prevented. Dermatologist Bobbie Edwards of Edwards Hair and Skin Medicine. Dr. Edwards is back to talk to us about hair loss in Black women. Dr. Edwards, welcome again to the show. It's certainly a pleasure to see you back again.
Thank you for having me.
Why is it important for us to have this conversation about women and hair loss?
Because we just suffer with it. We have to elevate this conversation. Our women are losing hair and trying to cover up and not living their best lives and being quite miserable, not understanding what's going on with their body. And they're owed this conversation and, to understand what's happening to them.
Why are some of these conditions misdiagnosed? People know that they're losing hair. I mean, come on, but why is it misdiagnosed?
Oftentimes they just don't seek help. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, dermatologists are supposed to be the doctors for hair, skin, and nails. Mm-hmm. And skin has kind of overshadowed our other two areas of interest. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times patients just don't get a very thorough evaluation when it comes to hair. And that's very unfortunate. We need to be doing more than just sending people out the door with Rogaine. Mm-hmm. We need to actually pin down a diagnosis for them, educate them properly on what's going on and what they can do to correct the problem.
We mentioned one of the issues earlier in the introduction, traction alopecia. What is the role that hairstyles play in this disease?
Traction is fully from pulling, just like you mentioned. It is a function of repetitive trauma to a hair follicle. And at some point, the hair follicle just stops growing. The hairlines are most vulnerable to this problem, but it can happen anywhere on the head depending on what kind of style we're talking about. And unfortunately, the hairs go dormant, and dormancy is not something that we have a reliable treatment for. So it's always a question whether hair is going to recover fully if there's traction involved, but there are things that we can do.
We see hair come out in phases, it seems like, but there are other things that seem to play a role also. I hate to talk about stress in this arena, but it's real.
Stress is real. The one thing that I can't do anything about, but it definitely has a place in hair loss, and it's diagnosable. I mean, by biopsy, it's diagnosable. So it has very specific physiologic changes that occur, and when the stress level is high enough, it will make the hair fall out. Luckily, if the stress can be relieved, the hair will generally come back. Right. But if someone's in a situation where they're having prolonged stress, they're a caregiver, or something where there's no end in sight.
Your boss getting on your nerves, get rid of your boss.
Exactly. Then if that's the case, then the hair will continue to fall out for an extended period of time.
We're treating everything with medications in this industry now. Medications in terms of hair loss, what are some of the big areas that we should be on the lookout for?
Medication-wise, we use cortisones when we're talking about hair loss because they are anti-inflammatory, which covers several of the big players in hair loss, and they also stimulate hair growth. We also use oral anti-inflammatory products. We use antibiotics. We actually have a new treatment. Well, it's not that new. It's the newest kid on the block where we're using our own blood to stimulate hair growth, and that's called platelet-rich plasma. So we have lots of exciting things going on in hair restoration right now.
How often are you seeing people where it is a underlying medical condition that's causing the hair loss, like autoimmune diseases? What role is that playing in terms of patients coming in with hair loss and don't know that they have the problem?
It does play a role, but it's a minor one. So typically the condition, typically alopecia is going to be caused by a primary dermatologic problem, not an internal problem, at least not one that's been undiagnosed. But it does happen frequently enough, especially in a hair loss practice like mine where we see quite a bit, where someone will come in with a plaque or something on their head that's not just hair loss. So if it's just thinning, it's probably going to be just alopecia. If it's thinning plus I have a sore, or I've got a dark spot, or I've got a tender area that looks different, then in those cases, very often we'll find an internal problem as well.
You mentioned Rogaine earlier. How effective and in who?
It actually works very well, but for genetic hair loss. That's what it's for. So if someone has a diagnosis of androgenic or androgenetic alopecia, then Rogaine minoxidil is the generic name, is a very nice option. It works in 60 to 70% of patients who use it, and it can grow enough hair that you can see it across the room. But it's used in many things that it's not for. And in that case, it's not going to necessarily do the job. And that's part of the dissatisfaction is that people will just go pick it up. I've got hair loss, I want to put this Rogaine on, but it's not the right thing, it doesn't work. And so then it goes from there.
Especially now that it's across the counter in a generic form. I mean, just go buy it and use it, right? Yeah. So basically, the conversation here again needs to be not so much buyer beware, but realistic expectations for the condition that the patient is trying to treat and the type of hair loss.
Yes, they need to figure out, everyone needs to figure out what their hair loss is from. In men, it's fairly simple. 95% of the time, hair loss in a man is going to be genetic, but only 50% of the time is hair loss in a woman going to be genetic. And so there are many more questions that we have to ask when we run into hair loss. Even if we think it looks genetic, the distribution is genetic or whatever, it doesn't mean that that's what it is. We really have to pin down that diagnosis before we start them on a treatment regimen.
So in the hair loss world, men are behind the game as far as women are concerned because
men run the game. Every single thing that comes out is always for the men. And the women have to, we just pick up the pieces and try to figure out where we can, get in and get our hair growing again.
Sometimes we see terms tossed around like temporary hair loss, permanent hair loss. How should we be applying that, and to what disease states in particular should we be applying those terms?
Typically, permanent is going to come into play if we're talking about inflammation or potentially dormancy. So inflammation is the primary problem with permanence because it causes scarring. And once a hair follicle is scarred, it's not going to be able to recover if it's far enough down that spectrum. Dormancy is not really scarring. There should be a way to get the hairs growing again. There's no understanding as to why the hair stops growing in that case. But again, we just don't have a reliable way to stimulate hairs when they have gone dormant. So sometimes dormancy becomes permanent as well. Every other situation should be able to be permanent if we can, should be able to be temporary if we can alleviate whatever the problem is. The hair should grow.
Are biopsies necessary in making the differentiation between the two?
In my opinion, yes. I do biopsies on almost all of my hair patients. It just answers the question. We don't have to guess about what you have. We understand what you have. And in some complicated situations where people may have two diagnoses, it is particularly helpful. So you can have a vulnerability to genetics that you just were born with, and then on top of that, your hairstyles led to traction, or inflammatory problem led to CCCA, and we have to treat both.
So would we be cautioned to talk about certain types of treatments based on age? Are there things that would work better for younger people than older people in terms of stimulation or regrowth?
The only thing I can think of is in the genetic world, some of the treatments that have hormonal influences might be better in pre or postmenopausal women. But everything else, it's more driven by how much damage has been done. And granted, as we get older and the problem has been on our body for longer, it's going to have, more of an impact, a negative impact. So if we can catch it earlier in women who are younger, then we have a better chance to fix it. Caveat though, some young women start handling their hair and having problems very early. So I've seen some women come in at 30 who have problems that are extensive enough to easily be a 50-year-old or 60-year-old based on what has happened to their hair during their styling life.
That's interesting because as these birthdays come along, I find hair growth is just in the wrong places.
Yeah, that's true.
But
That's true.
here again,
That's true.
something
We
is
all
going
do.
on somewhere. That's for
We
sure.
all do.
We're going to take a break. We'll be right back with more on this conversation about hair loss in Black women with Dr. Bobbie Edwards. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
All across the country, people are coming together to speed up what we can learn about health. The All of Us Research Program is calling on 1 million people to join us as we try to change the future of health. For your family, for future generations, for all of us. Visit joinallofus.org and find out how you can become 1 in a million.
Welcome back. We're here with dermatologist Dr. Bobbie Edwards. Bobbie, we touched a little bit earlier on hairstyles and traction alopecia. Are there any other hairstyles that contribute to hair loss? We love to see the variation that women come up with hairstyles, but are there any that poses a particular problem?
So the best way that we can wear our hair is naturally, the way it grows on our head. And everything else that we do is going to be some level of trauma that the body is going to have to deal with. And for people who have a small bucket where they can't deal with a lot, their body is made where they can't deal with a lot, they're going to have a problem. So I tend to feel most strongly about permanent chemicals, meaning a chemical that's going to permanently change the structure or color of the hair. Color is changing structure as well. So relaxers and permanent color are the things that have the most potential to go wrong. Rinse is going to be a little bit better. Once you get into the next arena is using a confined style of some sort, braids, weaves, ponytails. All of those can contribute to traction, but so can brushing and excessive brushing, that is, wearing hats frequently, twisting your hair on your finger. So any kind of repetitive pulling is a problem. That's not quite a style. And then even in the lock natural world, palm rolling the locks too much or twisting them down, interlocking them too much, too tightly, using a tool too aggressively, all of those things can cause traction issues. So long story short, less is more for our hair. It's gonna be happier. The other thing to think about is that our hair really needs hydration and moisturization. And hydration is the part that we struggle with the most, particularly if the hair is heat straightened. Then the ladies will not want to get it wet because it's going to bother their style. But kinky curly hair is physiologically prone to being dry. And we live in a harsh climate here in Michigan. And anyone else in the world who's in a place where their hair is prone to dryness, you're going to have to add the water in. Now that can be a simple spray mist. It can be water in the shower, just no shower cap, just the steam from the shower. All of those things work, but it has to be water put in the hair. It will soften the hair immediately. Then you also need some moisturizing aspect. I tend to like natural oils, but for heat straightened hair, you could use a water containing lotion, hair lotion, or a water containing cream hairdress. If you can get that mix right of hydration and moisturization, the strands will be much happier. And that's putting those things on the strands as opposed to the scalp. We don't need to grease the scalp. This is just for strand health.
Vitamins. Vitamins are everywhere, added to everything. Every hair product out there probably says, promotes hair growth because it's got vitamins in it. What is the real role that vitamins play in terms of hair health?
They can strengthen the strand, but there is no perfect recipe. So nobody has found the recipe yet. Every vitamin is a little bit different, a little more biotin, a little less, a little more vitamin A or C or E or whatever they want to put in it. There is competing science right now about the effectiveness of biotin itself. It looks like it's not doing as much as we have previously thought that it did, but many of us still use
Yeah,
it.
at one point it was really hot.
It was the thing,
Yes,
right? So my position on vitamins is that they can be taken and they will not hurt anything, but they will not correct a disease state. So if we're just talking about maybe making your hair grow a little faster, a little bit faster, or cutting down on breakage a little bit, I think they do a really nice job with that. If there's an inflammatory problem going on, if there's traction, if there's genetics, if there's something like that, then vitamins are not going to be a sole remedy.
Anything that would be particular in this arena to the black hair or the black female hair, because we see differences in other areas of healthcare as we treat, different populations or ethnic populations in particular. Is there anything that you would point out that black women really need to do or not to do that would talk about, your hair being healthy? Because that's what we want. I think most people would want a healthy grade of hair, and then from there go to style or appearance. But is there anything that you could point out on a routine basis? And the reason I ask that is because right now we're in a pill society. Okay, and everybody wants a pill for everything, to swallow for everything, and I remember when biotin was the craze. I mean, we had people probably overdosing to some degree, taking biotin, and probably didn't grow any hair or make a difference that they could visibly see. Any special tips or tricks?
I think for us, the most important thing is daily care. Hydration and moisturizing, like I talked about, is a huge factor. Very often women come in and they're understanding the difference between thinning and breakage. So they'll come in for thinning, meaning I can see their scalp too much, right? They've lost hair from the root. But the hair that's on the head is in such poor condition that it wouldn't support itself even if I could grow the hair back from the root. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing that I would point to. And it's a project. It's not something that's easy. It requires time. It requires patience with yourself. It requires sometimes money, going to the beauty supply store and buying things that maybe don't work the way you think they're going to, but continuing on. If that particular product didn't work, finding something else that you like, how it leaves your hair. And I think that's probably if we could get that part down, then at least the hair that we're growing is healthy. It's going to be lustrous and it's going to snap back. It's not going to break when it's under pressure and when we're trying to bend it and style it. That would get us a long way.
Well, the media basically has promoted transplants in men more than women. What is the experience with hair transplants in women?
Hair transplant can work, but again, it's diagnosis driven. So inflammatory conditions are very tricky to transplant, and we don't do it until we're 100% sure that the inflammation is under control, which means at least a year without treatment with no progression. So transplants were developed for use in genetic hair loss where inflammation is not a problem. Even so, it's more difficult to do transplants in some women because our hair loss is diffuse. So we don't have that nice male pattern where it's just gone on the top and it's growing great around the sides. We may have just thinning all over. So it becomes an exercise in planting trees in the forest. We have to go in between and try to figure out where we can put it. And it's very hard to get a great result that way. Women also happen to have in the genetic arena, they have their hair loss in the back of their head, which is where we're taking the hair from to move it to the top. And if that area is affected, then it means their transplant may not be successful. So transplants are really challenging in women or in any condition other than genetics, but specifically in women, even if they do have genetic hair loss.
Well,
Lumient, yes. We were waiting for it. It's here.
Been around for a couple of years now?
Not quite. We're going on a year,
Okay.
Going on a year. I think it came in the spring of 22. So this is a class of medicine called JAK inhibitor that was used for rheumatoid arthritis, and it was found to grow hair in alopecia areata. So they had to reformulate it to use in alopecia areata. 4 of them came out in 2022. One of the 4 sought an indication from the FDA for alopecia areata and received it, and that was a Lumient. It's a pill. It's taken once a day. There's some blood tests that have to be done with it. It is effective. You know, it doesn't cure everybody, but many of my patients that have alopecia areata, where we really were struggling to grow a few hairs at a time, are growing nice patches of hair now. So I think it's doing great. So far, so good.
How about that? So cost.
It's very expensive. So even with the FDA indication, coverage by insurance companies is still very challenging. And we do as much as we can to provide the medication to the patient or get them samples or, you know, some kind of supply of the medicine. And we hope that that's going to alleviate itself as the market allows. You know, insurance companies there'll be enough demand that hopefully insurances will start to cover it, or the manufacturers will figure out another way to get it to patients whose insurance will not cover.
Are you finding difficulty with generics? There are some generics in the primary care side that we just don't use because we know that the experience is just not there, for whatever reason, of all of the various reasons that we could choose not to use a drug. Do you find the same thing happening in the dermatology world, where you would say, look, I know that this is available and it's out there, but I prefer you not use this, use another product instead, simply because the generic formulation just doesn't live up to the brand name?
That does happen. Yeah, that does happen. And luckily we have a lot of overlap where we can choose something different and maybe get the effect that we're looking for. But yeah, that definitely happens.
That's interesting, because a lot of times we're wondering why stuff don't work. and it's not a good thing to prescribe these sorts of things and have patients suffer through the failure,
Right.
especially if we know better up front. But I'm glad to hear we're not in this by ourselves. You know, we kind of think of dermatology as you guys are just very successful in all these ways, and the patients just love to get better.
Right, we're struggling too. We don't want the patient to fail. They get discouraged,
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and then once they're discouraged, it's much harder to get anything done for them. So, yeah.
I think that if people feel better about their appearance, they automatically take a step up
Absolutely.
in terms of health.
Absolutely.
Right? It's more than just a psychological effect. I mean, it's a mood elevator. I mean, there's lots of benefits.
I think derm is unique in that way because everything on the skin is, it depends on where it is, of course, but it's visible. And so it does have an extra layer of emotion that goes with whatever you're dealing with, because you got to look at it every day.
Right.
You know, even if you can cover it up with clothes, you know it's there. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's there again, you know. So, yeah, it's anything that we can do to make the patients better.
Good. So here we are at Hartford Historical Baptist Church here, and basically, you know, in terms of people feeling better about themselves, the church plays a role in that as well as healthcare does. Where's the link, or how do we make the link between what we're doing in the dermatology world and the church itself? You know, in the old days, everybody got dressed up to go to church. You know, now it's kind of laissez-faire. You know, people kind of do what they want. Do you see any connections there that might be beneficial for a patient population?
I think there are always areas of outreach that might be easy for a church. There are bulletins. There are, you know, individual group meetings that happen during the week. There are all kinds of ways to just be open to the discussion around whatever the parishioners are dealing with. The American Academy of Dermatology actually has 3 awareness campaigns that they put on every year. May is Skin Cancer Awareness Month. October is Eczema Awareness Month. And November is National Healthy Skin Month. And so those are 3 times that a church could piggyback on any of those and kind of bring information to the congregation, set up events. You know, there's so many things that they can do during that time to kind of bring people in to talk about their dermatologic issues.
I constantly, in this arena, think about a patient we had years ago who was embarrassed about their skin condition until somehow they fell into the right hands, and because of their facial appearance, was not embarrassed by coming to church and participating in church activities and stuff, even though people were encouraging to say, "Oh, you need to do it anyway." But when the transformation or the improvement occurred, I mean, it made a total difference in the person and their spiritual life as well. So I think there's a real connection there, as you say, that what the church can do, and it's usually an outreach that has to happen. This has been exciting. Maybe I'll do something to improve the appearance from a dermatological standpoint of view as well.
Dr. Joe, you're already a 10. What do
That's
you
what are you
want? My
talking about?
goodness, you're good.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards.
Absolutely.
Our guest has been board-certified dermatologist, Dr. Bobbie Edwards. Thank you, Bobbie, for joining us.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
When it comes to hair loss, it's never too early to speak with a dermatologist who is familiar with your hair type about what can be done to prevent or minimize loss. Thank you for joining us today on Primary Care. I'm Dr. Lonnie Joe.